Thank you. So I want to invite up the auditor's staff to take up item 2, which is the disaster preparedness audit. I want to, I think at some point we'll need to clarify the difference between this audit and the after action reports. But this is an audit that was specifically asked for by resolution that Councilmember Tovo led on, and I co-sponsored, and I'm not sure who else was on that. It's really, really important that we prepare for future emergencies, and one way that we do that is from learning from the past and taking action. And this is a really important step in being better prepared. So I'm going to invite the auditor's staff to present, and after they present, we will give the appropriate staff members an opportunity to respond to the audit, and then we will open it up for comments and questions. Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. My name is Maria Stroth, and I was the audit lead for this project. The objective of this audit was to determine if the city's disaster planning and preparedness efforts positioned the city to respond effectively and equitably to Winter Storm Uri. As you know, Winter Storm Uri was an unusually severe event. In Austin, there were 7 days below freezing and a recorded 6 inches of snow. Austinites experienced extended periods without electricity and were under a boil water notice for 6 days. City staff who responded to the storm put in an incredible amount of effort to respond to the storm and worked tirelessly for many days. In fact, these efforts are continuing as staff think about how to improve disaster responses in the future. The impact on the community was significant. As you can see in the graph on the right, Travis County had the second most deaths in the state after Harris County. 21 of these deaths were within the city limits, and 16 involved hypothermia. Additionally, people who died skewed older than the general population. About 64% of people who died were older than 60. Also, 4 people who died were experiencing homelessness. In our audit, we had 4 findings. The first was related to planning and preparedness generally, and the others were related to communication, resources, and equity. We found the city was unprepared to respond to Winter Storm Uri for 3 main reasons. I'll discuss these reasons on the following slides. But at a high level, the city's planning efforts did not adequately consider the risks posed by a severe, prolonged, or widespread disaster. Also, the city had not implemented past recommendations that may have improved its response, and had not historically prioritized disaster preparedness and community resilience. The climate crisis is expected to result in more intense and more frequent weather emergencies, but the city hasn't adequately prepared for this. The city's plans acknowledge major or catastrophic events, but have little specifics for how to respond to them. City plans also acknowledge the potential of a winter storm, but not one with the impact we saw during Winter Storm Uri. Plans anticipated a limited severity storm, one with short duration, no loss of life, and limited impact on city services like power and water. They also anticipated the need to treat roads for ice, but not for snow removal. Of course, the conditions of February's storm were much more severe than these planning assumptions. There are also a number of lessons learned that are discussed in our report that if the city had acted on, may have improved its response. Again, these are in our report, so I'll discuss them only at a high level. This included recommendations from past disasters where the city looked at what had happened before and made recommendations to improve. A recommendation from a 2011 audit where we recommended the city make sure all departments have continuity of operations plans on file to ensure they're able to respond and continue city services in a disaster. It also included recommendations from past trainings, including one on winter weather, and recommendations from city plans where the city had developed recommendations to mitigate hazards facing the city and increase resilience. Staff reported challenges with implementation included a lack of staff time and resources, which was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. But another challenge is the number of recommendations that have been made. In just the most recent 3 after-action reports for past disasters, there were over 400 recommendations. So this is definitely a challenge for the city. Prioritizing these recommendations based on those that would have the most impact would be beneficial. The city also has not historically prioritized or funded disaster preparedness or community resilience initiatives. In August 2019, City Council directed City Management to implement resiliency hubs. And in May 2020, Council directed City Management to develop a comprehensive resiliency plan. Neither of these were acted on before the storm in February. However, City Council recently approved $3 million for 2 resiliency hub pilot projects that are expected to be completed in the next 2 years. We made several recommendations in response to this finding. We recommended the city manager prioritize COOP planning and also prioritize initiatives to increase disaster preparedness and community resilience, including the resiliency hubs I mentioned earlier. We also recommended the director of HESM plan for, train, and conduct exercises for significant or catastrophic events and prioritize, implement, and track past recommendations. Our second finding was related to communication. We found that the city did not communicate effectively with Austin residents in the days leading up to or during Winter Storm Uri because the city was unprepared for such a severe winter storm. So residents were left without critical information that may have helped them stay safe. We had 3 main issues related to communication, which I'll discuss on the following slides. The city's early messages did not communicate the urgency of the situation to residents or adequately prepare them for possible risks, like widespread or prolonged power or water outages and impassable roads. Early messages primarily focused on icy conditions and potential damage to pipes, such as the tweet on the right of the slide, but didn't prepare the cities for the unusual and severe nature of the storm, such as messaging about preparing for extended water or power outages and ensuring supplies were on hand, like food and water. Even less preparedness information was provided between February 12th and February 14th. This was after the Emergency Operations Center was activated and before snow began to fall in the Austin area. Additionally, minimal preparedness information was provided through the city's warning system, Warn Central Texas. The city communicated a winter storm weather warning had been issued through this system, but no other preparedness information. We also found that information about preparing for power and water outages was received after it was too late to be useful. This was because the city had not anticipated the possibility of these occurring. As you can see on the slide, residents were made aware of possible power outages at 1:10 a.m. They were then made aware that power outages were starting at 1:25 a.m. just 15 minutes later. This occurred partly because the city didn't receive information from outside regulators with much advance notice, and information changed really quickly. For example, the time between ERCOT alerting the city about possible issues and them calling for rotating power outages was only about an hour. But still, had the city anticipated the possibility of a prolonged power outage in its planning efforts, the city could have communicated better about preparing for this possibility early on. As I mentioned, information about preparing for water outages was also received after it was too late to be useful. As you can see on the slide, Austin Water tweeted at 6 p.m. that there were no plans to disrupt water service. Later that night, Austin Water said they were aware of water outages in Southwest Austin, and they implemented a citywide boil water notice the next day. This, of course, didn't give residents enough time to prepare for these water outages. This occurred because the city hadn't thought through what communications it would need for such a significant or widespread event. Austin Water staff said they had messaging and preparedness tips prepared for a typical 1 or 2 day freeze, but not a week-long one. Planning for how to communicate in these sort of severe and prolonged disasters is critical given the ongoing climate crisis. The city also communicated minimal information in non-English languages, and these communications were often less timely. This is particularly important because when we look at the 5 most commonly spoken languages in Austin, there are at least 88,000 residents in the city who speak English less than very well. So many residents have the need to access information about disasters in languages other than English to stay safe. In fact, information during a disaster is known as being just as critical as food or water. The city's language access policy requires the city to send messages through Warn Central Texas in Spanish and to make reasonable efforts to send those messages in other languages. Communicate all of these messages in Spanish and didn't communicate messages in any other languages through this system. As you can see on the slide, the first message sent through Warn Central Texas was on February 15th. This was 4 days after an initial message was sent to English speakers on February 11th, 3 days after the Emergency Operations Center was activated, and a day after snow began to fall in the Austin area. This was also the day power outages started for many. Staff reported it was difficult to access language access vendors because many of them are local and were also affected by the storm. We saw the main reason these issues occurred was a lack of preparation for communicating disaster-related information in other languages. After-action reports have consistently identified language access as an issue. For example, the Colorado River flooding event recommended the city develop a language access plan for emergencies, but this has not been developed. Additionally, based on a review of communications-related plans, the plans only address Spanish and American Sign Language and no other languages. As a result, the city was unprepared to serve residents with limited English proficiency. We made a couple of recommendations in response to this finding. We recommended the director of HESM plan for, train, and conduct exercises for communicating during significant events and work with the director of the Communications and Public Information Office to create and implement a language access plan for emergencies. Our next finding was related to resources. Even if the city's plans had anticipated a severe winter storm, the city likely would not have been able to respond effectively because the city lacked adequate resources to respond to such a complex disaster. Some departments have supplies on hand, but the city doesn't generally maintain an emergency supply stockpile and couldn't easily rely on other agencies for supplies due to the widespread nature of this event. The city also has no centralized inventory to track supplies across city departments that may be available to use during disasters. Staff reported we don't maintain supplies on hand because it would be cost prohibitive and there's a lack of storage space. But this caused a lot of challenges during Winter Storm Uri. The city didn't have supplies like generators, tire chains, food, water, or snowplows, and had trouble accessing supplies from elsewhere. A cost-benefit analysis to determine what to keep on hand would be beneficial. The city also doesn't have an effective process for ensuring staff are available and trained to respond to disasters. And the city didn't have adequate staffing to respond effectively to the storm. This lack of staffing was a major challenge in the city's ability to respond. In a disaster, especially one like Winter Storm Uri, the city needs to be able to rely on staff from across all city departments to come together and respond. What we heard throughout the audit was that it was difficult for HESM to find volunteers from city departments to meet the many needs they had. So staff who responded were working extremely long hours and being expected to do a lot. We recommended the city manager improve staffing processes to ensure the city is utilizing more of its staff from across the city to respond in disasters. We saw examples of these sorts of processes in Houston and Fort Worth, which we mentioned in our report. We made a few recommendations in response to this finding. We recommended the city manager evaluate current HESM staffing and add staff if needed, and update processes to ensure adequate staff from across the city are available and trained. We also recommended the director of HESM ensure the city has adequate supplies and equipment available for future disasters. Our last finding was related to equity. We found that the city's disaster planning and preparedness efforts are not equity-focused, and as a result, the city's response did not effectively serve all residents. The city's plans do not contain the specificity needed to help city staff directly serve populations who need it the most, such as detail on how vulnerable populations will be reached during a disaster. We saw examples of plans acknowledging equity concerns exist, but little detail for how to manage those concerns. The city also does not have a formalized process for engaging community stakeholders to assist with reaching vulnerable populations, even though this is recommended by best practices. The city relied on informal contacts that staff and city council members knew as a means of reaching vulnerable populations, rather than having an established list or database of community organizations. A more established approach would help the city better serve the community, but may also alleviate some of the strain on city resources during a disaster, which was a major challenge. There was a lot going on. This would also help the city focus on serving individuals who need assistance and resources the most. Lastly, the city does not know if it is reaching the most vulnerable members of our community because the city doesn't have a good way to measure its outreach efforts. The city has some measures related to community preparedness for disasters, but these measures are community-wide and too broad to guide specific efforts and to understand who is not being reached with current information. Staff said the main limit to tracking and analyzing data on outreach is a lack of staffing, which again has been particularly difficult during the COVID-19 pandemic. We recommended the director of HESM take several actions to ensure the needs of vulnerable populations are met during a disaster and develop a formal plan for involving the community in disaster preparedness and planning. That concludes our presentation. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you. I think we're going to allow the staff to respond, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Alter?
Yes. Mr. Ariano.
Thank you, Councilmember Alter and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to offer remarks on behalf of the city manager on this topic. Winter Storm Uri was a statewide catastrophic event layered on top of an already historic global pandemic that continues today. The city of Boston, like the state of Texas, was unprepared for such a complex disaster. Yet, our employees rose to the challenge and did their very best, many of them leaving their families to serve the community first. And speaking of community, we also saw community members and organizations working to help one another during this epic event. Today's audit report, together with the after action report we presented to council last week, will serve as the basis for staff's efforts to continue making improvements that will better serve the community. I would note for the committee and the public that improvement efforts will take time and additional resources. In the case of a few key departments such as Homeland Security and Emergency Management, Austin Public Health, and Communications and Public Information Office, they continue to be actively engaged in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic as well. This raises the importance of the community's role to prepare before a disaster happens by making a plan, knowing their neighbors, and staying informed. Residents can visit readycentraltexas.org to learn about the tools available to help with emergency preparedness. Additionally, residents are also encouraged to begin building emergency kits now and supplies now, including enough water, food, batteries, radio, and first aid for up to 7 days. As always, the city manager's office recognizes the opportunities for improvement through the work of the city auditor and appreciates our working together on this and all audit reports. Thank you, and with that, we're certainly open for questions the committee may have.
So before I open up for questions from the committee, I did want to invite Katie up, if you could speak, or whoever would be appropriate, to just speak a little bit about putting this audit in context relative to the after action report. And then I'll want to make a few comments, and then I will invite my colleagues for questions.
Sure, I could speak to that. So I think y'all are pretty familiar with our work, but our charge was to look at this through a citywide lens and to really evaluate the prior planning efforts that the city had put together and whether or not that really set us up for success during this storm. And Haggerty, I think they could speak to what their efforts are intended to do, but really I think they took sort of a different lens, and there's a lot to look at here, so I think there's a lot of overlap in our results, but certainly their charge was different.
Thank you. I really appreciate the thoroughness of this report. Before we get into conversation, I want to make it really clear that if we have a conversation about what we need to do better, where we made mistakes, that is not to discount the very heroic efforts that the staff who were able to respond took during that storm. We all are familiar with folks who went above and beyond, who were juggling their own challenges at home, being without power, et cetera. But we do owe it to our employees and our citizens to examine what happened, where we took missteps, and how we can move forward. And so it's in that spirit that we are looking at this audit and talking about how we use this information moving forward. So I think that's really important that we recognize that as a city council, it is our responsibility to work to improve our preparedness. It's our city management's responsibility to look towards that. There's a lot in this audit, and anyone who hasn't read it, I encourage you to read it. There's a lot of opportunities that were missed that we need to double down and move forward on. The audit speaks very eloquently to the numerous resolutions and reports that had recommendations of how we could be better prepared, many of which seem very prescient in light of the events. I would focus folks' attention on the FEMA 2020 February recommendations at the top of page 12. So we need to address sheltering for winter weather. We need to do an exercise involving not having any electric power. We need for non-operational departments to help operational departments. We need long-term staffing. Now, granted, that came out just before the pandemic, but we know a lot of the things that we need to be doing. We have reports that said we needed to have access to language, et cetera. All of those are in there. We need to do better, and I have to say, as chair of the Audit and Finance Committee, that I have never seen a management response that was so defensive in light of the magnitude of the challenge that's before us and the real possibility that something like this could happen again. And it's my hope that the city management will take these recommendations seriously and work with council to provide the resources moving forward. I want to now open up the floor to questions. I want to invite Councilmember Tovo, whose resolution led to this particular audit, if she wants to go first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to start in very much the same place you did, Councilmember Alter. I want to really acknowledge our staff throughout the organization, from our individual council offices to our emergency responders, our public safety staff, our Parks Department, our public health. There were really, as you said, Councilmember Alter, just heroic efforts throughout our organization from staff members who were suffering through this storm as well, and whose families were suffering through this storm. And none of the following conversation discounts any of that extraordinary effort. I was on the phone over and over and over again with one of our city employees, only to learn days in that he had been having most of those conversations from his car because he had no electricity in his home. And so there is no doubt that the heroic and ongoing efforts of all of our city staff who were involved in the response saved lives. As the audit notes, there were several real catastrophic events that did not happen and did not unfold in our hospitals and some of the other places where they could have because of the actions of our city. That being said, as a council member, very involved in lots of elements of that emergency response, from helping get water to constituents, not just in my district, but others, and helping, trying to stand up warming centers and do so many of the other real important basic needs that were required during that period of time. I saw things that I had not seen in our emergency response in the past, and definitely this was there were elements of this crisis that were unforeseen, and a confluence of events that were unexpected to some extent and happening together was not contemplated. So while I understood the challenges, there were certain processes and protocols that I believed should be flowing better. I'll just name one of them. As a council member, we had limited communication, almost no communication to our general communication to our council, few updates, no identified contact for us. And so, I think that's probably a conversation we need to have in the after-action report more than in this one. But I can tell you, as a council member, receiving phone calls and emails and other kinds of texts from constituents who were not sure they were going to be able to survive in their house for the next couple days, it was critically important to me to make sure that we never had a situation again where I didn't even know who to ask among the city staff for help, or to communicate those really dire, potentially life-altering queries for help too. So part of the resolution had three parts. One was just to have an initial question and answer session, some workshops, some work sessions with our city staff so that we could ask our initial questions. The other part was a community task force, which did a great job, and there's a very useful report with some recommendations that I believe really align very well with the audit, with some of the findings of the audit, including especially and importantly, language access. That came up again and again in the community conversations around this event. And then the third part was this audit. The after-action report is going to be very useful. I am appreciative to Councilmember Alter. The two of us are co-sponsoring a special called session. I'm not sure yet whether that's going to be part of our next work session or on a different day, so that we really have the time we need to ask questions of the consultant about the after-action report. And I hope we'll also have an opportunity to talk with our colleagues about the findings of the audit. They are very different in approach, and though there are some themes that happen in both, I think what is not, I haven't really read the after-action report in the level of detail I need to, but what it doesn't necessarily focus, at least in my review at this point, on are what of those recommendations had been made in the past. And so your audit really clearly shows where several of those areas were, where multiple times in some cases, our emergency operations were told to have a language access plan, to have some of these resources in place, to talk about staffing, to talk about training across departments, and it didn't happen. And so, ACM Ariano, I think you have an important message about personal preparedness, and clearly that needs to also be part of our work as a city in preparing a resilient community. But we do need to answer, I think, to our constituents about why we were not preparing, just for starters, why we were not providing that kind of information in a language they could understand. So one example, for example, is the water boil notice, which went out to non-English language speakers and was delivered in Chinese, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Arabic one day after the water boil notice took effect. So could you please first, I have a lot of questions, but I'll start there. Could you talk to us about language access? This has been a need identified in multiple reports, in after-action reports. Can you talk generally about why those recommendations related to language access had not been implemented at the time of the weather event? And then once the weather event happened, can you talk about why those emergency messages, both about preparedness before the event and response, including especially the water boil notice, once the event had taken place?
Councilmember Tova, I do believe Jessica King from the Communications and Public Information Office, I see her standing there, can respond to that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. King, I didn't see you over there. It's hard knowing where to put our attention here.
Check. Good morning, council members. My name is Jessica King. I'm with the Communications and Public Information Office. And language access is a key tenet of what the CPIO group works towards. And the reality is we actually did have, and we do have, a language access plan in place for HESA. The challenge was that our staff, who are the leads on language access, did not have power, did not have internet access, and therefore had a challenge reaching the our vendors who provide the service. And so we were not able to access those services because we could not get a hold of those vendors to support us in that need. Keeping also in mind that the way our structure is set up for language access, we heard from many community members of the interest of utilizing local vendors to help with translation and interpretation needs because, and it makes a lot of sense, many of our vendors, many of our local participants know the community. They can serve as ambassadors. They understand the language that is utilized here. And so most of our vendors are here. Again, the challenge was they were experiencing the same difficulties that many of our staff and the rest of our community were experiencing. And so one of the responses and the way we will need to address that is ensuring that our staff have access to power, even when power goes out, as well as reliable internet. Internet was going in and out throughout the course of the event. I'm sure many of you also experienced the same challenges. And so even though we might have had limited power, again, I know for a fact my staff, again, were also working in their cars to send text messages, to send posts, and to try and contact our vendors to be able to help with translation. Translation is also something that doesn't occur overnight, and the event was a moving target in many ways because the information we were receiving was occurring at the same time, especially regarding power. We were receiving it live as the public was receiving it. And so as that information was rolling down from energy providers at the state level, we were getting it too. And it is difficult to translate that on the fly when it then changes again. And so the challenge is, how do we make sure that, one, our language access services are able to be accessed even if are they experiencing the same problems? Can we go national? Can we look at different resources that we can access? But most importantly, our staff need power and internet access to secure those services.
Clearly, and thank you for identifying and talking us through the piece that was relevant after the storm happened and knocked out power. There were some moments, some examples that our audit cites about messages not being translated into Spanish prior to the storm hitting, presumably before your staff lost power. Can you address that issue, please?
I would want more detail on the specifics because, again, the storm was one that was a moving target. Rolling blackouts occurred, or rolling outages occurred. We were notified in the morning hours, the early morning hours. And so the impact of those situations weren't really realized until the crack of dawn for most people who are just waking up and realizing they're quite cold. So a lot, depending upon what the translation was, as soon as we were able to get people online and aware of the situation, then we were able to move more quickly, and we utilized staff that we had who had access to some power and to some internet resources to translate the material as quickly as we could.
Yeah, I think as you've identified, the plans going forward are going to have to account for a situation that hasn't presented itself before in this community, where your staff who are doing the work and need to be in contact with those vendors are unable to get reliable access to electricity, to internet. That's clearly going to need a different kind of solution, and you've identified some options of having, a priority for local vendors, but also those relationships with individuals in outside communities. I would say, and I think it is the audit that suggests this as well, that also having kind of a second or third tier team that may be outside of your office, but are other city staff members who can help if they have access to those resources that your staff did not, even if they're from other departments. I don't know whether anything like that exists currently.
We do. I am a fan of ensuring that we have cross training among our team, because I do not believe in one point of failure. And so there are multiple staff who have access, but we have at least, I think, 3 to 4 tiers of those who can secure those vendors and reach them. We could not reach those staff because of power and internet access failures.
So your team couldn't reach those other resources because you couldn't get in touch with them?
It was in both directions. So my staff, when we woke up early in the morning and experienced this situation across the city, the immediate response is check in with the staff, who is available, who can help, who can get online and start doing work. And so because we were virtual, we're in a COVID environment, we're not in our office, we couldn't travel because of the roads, the best thing we can do is go through text and go through calls. Many of our staff were not able to either secure, their power died on their phone, or internet issues one way or the other. So securing access to them to find out who can help, that was the first barrier. And then once we were able to get people ramped up, that's where the lag and delay, and then translation occurs after that.
Added more time.
Yeah, so it is a sense of trying to hope and pray that your staff are okay when you don't hear from them. And then to rely on them to help get information out as you are also trying to bring everything else online and working too.
And just to reemphasize that point that we stated at the beginning, that I know the chair stated that I did as well, I think it's really important to go through, to really talk about these in detail. At the same time, I want to commend you and your staff for the work that you did do, and I hope that you understand the spirit in which we're trying to understand what exactly happened and where the challenges were, so that we can make sure we've got plans B, C, and D, all the way on up to Z, so that if we're in a situation like that again, everyone knows what that next step should be. Going back to before the storm, though, I will just say, I think that's going to require a different solution and frankly, a different response, and I'm not necessarily understanding yet why those messages about emergency preparedness in the days before the storm hit were not translated into multiple languages. And more broadly, and maybe this is a conversation we can take up for the after action in our longer half-day, day-long conversation, what steps have been taken with regard to making sure that we can get those messages out, especially about preparedness in advance of events in those languages that we know our neighbors need.
Absolutely. We are in the works on that already. I do appreciate the spirit with which this council and this body is looking at changes. I do hope that you also understand that we lived through it as well, and staff is intent on making changes because we don't want to go through this again ourselves. And there's a commitment across the organization, and especially those of us who worked the many, many hours to make sure that this community could overcome such a devastating storm. We want to see those changes too. So I hope that despite all the criticism, we can look towards those change, and the recommendations that staff brings forward can be implemented.
Thank you very much for that, for all of that. So I think I have more questions, but since I've been talking about this for a while, I still will need a better understanding of why those messages prior to the storm were not translated. And so I don't know whether there's a response you want to give now or after, Ms. King, but I know our audit did identify that as an issue, and
I will certainly look into it. I want
Okay.
to look at all the storm information and the content. I do know that we have a database of pre-translated material, and we have accumulated that over time. So I want to look at that database and see whether or not we also need to make tweaks to the information, because as the storm started rolling in, this was layers of storm, if you recall. So
Right.
one came in, and then it stopped, and then another came in, and it stopped, and then another came in. And so we need to take a look at how the information that we've already pre-translated was, whether or not it was actually helpful
yeah,
in anticipation of the event.
good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Tovo. Just for a time check, we do need to take up the EMS item, which we can do closer to 11. If we need to continue this conversation at our next meeting, we can. But just in terms of a time check on amount of time, we have about another half hour that we can potentially keep talking about this today.
Yeah, cut it short. How long are we scheduled? I thought we were scheduled till 12:30 today. Is that not accurate?
No, it's just till 11:30.
Gotcha. Thanks.
But we can extend the conversation in December and whatnot. But I think we did have an hour plus on this. So Councilmember Kelly, did you want to go next?
Thank you. And I just want to say also, I echo the sentiments of my colleagues as far as the heroic efforts that were done during the winter storm. But I'm hearing from the community overwhelmingly, especially people in my district, who think it's very concerning that the city is telling people to be prepared, and this audit shows that we are unprepared. So I'd like to move forward, much like my colleagues, and make sure that we are able to implement these changes. So in recommendation number 4, the auditor's report talks about corrective actions and implementations. My understanding is that HSEM has an entry-level employee who has no authority in either his department or city to enforce compliance with corrective action plans. And it's my analysis that if that is accurate, which I think that Juan may be able to speak to, Director Ortiz, that role should probably be given to one of the deputy directors who has authority to enforce those plans, because one of the recommendations says that needs to happen. Can you speak to that for me and maybe clarify what I've been told or what I just talked about?
Or, excuse me, AV, does that work for them to be speaking over there, or should we have them come speak with auditors? That works over there for your perspective? Okay.
Good morning, Councilmember. I'm Juan Ortiz, with the Director for Homeland Security and Emergency Management. We're looking into that, and we'll be making some adjustments in responsibilities and clarifying the roles and maybe it might have been just a lack of awareness of what exactly their function needed to be. But we're looking at that recommendation and making the adjustments as we move forward. COOP is something that is very important. It's going to be vital for our departments to make sure that they have all of their capabilities ready to respond.
And for those at home who don't know what COOP is, it's the Continuity of Operations Planning, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks. In recommendation number 7, it talks about, in the audit, available supplies during disasters. And I'd like to clarify this information as well. My understanding is that there has been an effort to create a 3-person logistics team within Homeland Security and Emergency Management to manage the warehouse that you all are leasing, where you store supplies. But I don't think that addresses the facility or existing plan to change staffing. So I'd like to understand if the contract staff now that's on hand could possibly be created into permanent positions, or what your further plans are for that warehouse. If you could just briefly talk about that.
Yes, so because of the pandemic, we've had to establish a longer or more robust logistical function. In previous disasters, the logistical function was only stood up for a period of time to manage the disaster, but because of the pandemic, this has been going on for over a year now. And that has allowed us to expand and evaluate some of the additional things that we need to consider, ensure that we have an adequate inventory management system. That required temporary staff to be brought on board, and it really has helped us kind of grab a hold of the resources that we have acquired from the pandemic that were also available to respond to the winter storm. And as we move forward, as we look at these disasters being more complex, and the frequency of disasters that we're having, it's something that we're looking at to evaluate the logistical necessary capabilities in order to ensure that we're ready to respond to future disasters. That will also include staffing necessary to support those functions.
Thank you. So prior for me, before I was on council, I worked in emergency management, so I have a deep understanding of the work that you do, and I know that it is very complicated. In recommendation 8, it talks about the public information that goes out to the community. And when I worked I was a single unit PIO resource in the PIO section at the Bastrop County Complex Fire, and I know that there are several different levels of vetting that happen within the PIO section at HSEM. Can you explain that just briefly so the public understands?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, sorry. Could you explain the levels of vetting that go through before a message goes out from Homeland Security and Emergency Management through a disaster? I believe there's 3 levels of vetting that goes forward, which could add to the length of time that it takes to get a message out.
Yes, exactly. And it's very important that the information that goes out to the public is timely and it's actionable and addresses the question that we're trying to answer. And so we do go through a vetting process to ensure that we coordinate with the operational departments on that, on the accuracy of the information. And then we go through a process to also include the EOC director and policy group to evaluate that information, the dissemination that's going to go out, as well to ensure that we get it out as quickly as we can in as many languages as we can. As my colleague Jessica King indicated, we were drastically limited in our abilities. This was a disaster different from other ones. And the information was constantly changing, and that required us to go back and restart that process. We want to make sure that the information that goes out is accurate as best as we possibly can make it, and as timely as we can get it out quickly.
Thank you. And then just lastly, I was particularly concerned during this severe weather event because as a newly elected council member, I was still getting my footing. And my understanding was that council members get information to access so that they can talk to their constituents about what's happening. And at one point, I became so frustrated because city staff was not reachable or they just were doing other things that I went outside of our city to get access to that information. At the Capital Area Council of Governments, I needed the situation reports. And I don't think that that's good practice And I would like to see moving forward a much better flow of information to council and to city leadership or from city leadership. So thank you very much for all the work that you did. It was certainly, they don't call these types of events, they're incidents because you can't put them on a calendar and schedule them. So thank you for all the work that you did during that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then invite Councilmember Fuentes, who's not on the committee, if she has questions at that point. So we have 130-some recommendations from the after-action report from Haggerty, plus whatever's in the specific AE and Austin Water recommendations. We have 10 fairly clear recommendations, I believe is the number from this audit. Something over the order of 400 recommendations from past plans that need implementing or have been recommending. There is obviously overlap across them. There are patterns of things where we've seen there's been problems, as has been mentioned, with language access and shelter, et cetera. Mr. Ariano or Mr. Ortiz, help me understand how we are prioritizing among these recommendations. We just got a lot of these recommendations. Some had been there, they hadn't been acted on. What I don't want to have happen is what has already happened, is where we didn't act on recommendations from past reports. I mean, the number of recommendations that have been acted on with respect to the water boil event in 2018 is astonishing. So help me understand how we are prioritizing, because I think we all understand the constraints and the unusual circumstances of February. What we're concerned about is not repeating those and making sure that we're prepared. So please speak to how we are going to prioritize among these different recommendations and to move forward.
Let me speak on that and see if there's any additional information that Assistant City Manager, Mr. Ariano, we may want to add. I think the challenge that our community has faced in the last 4 to 5 years has been the fact that there's been a high level of activity as far as disasters are concerned. And they're being more frequent. Our after-action review process does take a while because it is very comprehensive. And in the last 2 years, in addition to the pandemic, we also responded to a major coastal evacuation for Hurricane Laura and the winter storm event. There has been work done to address some of the action reports. Unfortunately, the frequency of the disasters occurring has gotten in the way of seeing some of those efforts that are underway going to get to completion. Some of the solutions are a little bit more complicated, more complex, and so require a little bit more time. The way that we're going to move forward, and that is to look at all of these corrective actions that we have addressed, even the previous ones that we have looked at that were resolved, but we're seeing them come back again, and is prioritizing based on what are the ones that we can address very quickly as well, and make sure that we have the commitment from not only the city and county departments, but as well as some of these are going to be partnerships with our community partners, and ensure that we provide the adequate level of attention, given the fact that we have an ongoing response to a pandemic. I think it is important that we look at what critical infrastructure needs to be strengthened, what emergency protective measures can be taken in order to ensure that we can limit the future impacts of disasters, as well as look at what capabilities the city and the county need and the rest of the community need to develop to ensure that we have the tools to be able to respond. Some of the challenges that we have seen is that the city may have some capabilities, but the people that we need to help don't have the infrastructure to make the assistance go a lot smoother. So there needs to be a broader communication that we need to engage to ensure that we're looking at what ways to prioritize that infrastructure adaptability to ensure that what capabilities we're building in the city are able to be quickly utilized to minimize the disasters. For example, in 2018, we suffered a boil water crisis that impacted dialysis facilities. We experienced the same during this winter storm. So we need to look at, make sure that dialysis facilities have the adequate equipment to allow us to be able to provide water if we need to, or power if we need to, in an easy manner so that we can ensure that they're able to provide the continuing services that they provide to the community. It's not an easy challenge. I do know that we're committed to sitting down with all our partners and look at that matrix of prioritization based on what needs to be done to save lives and protect property as best way that we can to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ariano. Did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair. I would just add that certainly Director Ortiz has done a good job already, starting with the community task force recommendations and doing a side-by-side comparison with the after action report. Certainly, this will have the attention of the city manager's office to help with HESM as well as the other involved departments to prioritize and see how we might incorporate recommendations in the FY23 proposed budget as well as future budgets.
So I'm going to ask that at our special called meeting that you come prepared with a really clear statement of how we're prioritizing and what that plan is, because that's what we as a council need to understand. We can't understand what resources you need. We can't understand what steps need to take place with, a mess of 600 recommendations, many of which overlap, et cetera. There's a lot of really important recommendations. Some's low-hanging fruit, some is more complicated. But we need that clarity that we are on top of this and that we're taking every measure possible to make sure that this doesn't repeat. And I will just point out that it is November. February is not very far away. And so it is concerning about, what has been done. And I understand we are in a pandemic. I understand we have multiple disasters, but we have to figure out, as we did during COVID, to iterate and move forward and learn from mistakes, take the recommendations and implement them. The next question I have is, some of the dates for implementation in this audit are alarming. 2023, 2024, again, it's November. February is right around the corner. I would like to understand, Mr. Ariano, why we are waiting till the fiscal year 23 budget to be implementing things. Obviously, there's some things that can be implemented under the budget, but, if HESM has 15 staff members and we're still in a pandemic, et cetera, and we have also, expectation that we're going to have climate events, we have to resource the department. We have to resource moving forward with these recommendations. And if we wait until August, then we're waiting until October, then it takes 3 months or 4 months to hire, et cetera, that's too late. So help me understand why we're waiting until fiscal year 23 and what we're doing now. Because I just don't think there's that much wiggle room in HESM's budget or whoever else's budget to do that.
So I would briefly say, certainly happy to look at opportunities for a mid-year budget adjustment. In the particular case of HESM's staffing, certainly we've been able to take advantage of temporary staffing to get us along in terms of the addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, and Juan Ortiz can talk a little bit more specifically about that. But again, I think some of these longer-term lead items that we've identified, at least in our initial management response, looks to how we might address each item comprehensively, and it will take time to do that. In the meantime, though, certainly open to taking a look at, as HESM has, how we might do things using temporary resources and doing as much planning as we can to get things moving.
Yeah, I think, again, I just really want to underscore that as a council member, I need to understand the level of priority these actions are having, or we're going to have to start doing IFCs over particular elements of the after action report. And it's, we have before us an audit that basically says we've done all these after-action reports and we haven't followed through on them. Well, we can't keep doing that. We have to implement, what is in here or some combination of the different reports and get moving on different pieces. It is extremely frustrating as a council member who sponsored a resolution in 2019 that said, set up resilience hubs, said we're going to have these climate actions, we need to be organized and do these things, and to look at these various reports and after action reports and to think that we were implementing them. I think that, it's extremely frustrating, and we need systems in place that don't let that happen again. And I think colleagues that are on the committee, we need to think about whether we want to be devoting sort of some regular time to be looking at, particular pieces of these reports and how they're getting implemented and diving into particular pieces to draw attention to things that rise up for us on that. And then lastly, I want to take up the point that Councilmember Kelly mentioned with respect to council members and having the training and the information that we need in order to do our job and to not get in the way of the response. So what processes should exist going forward for a more formalized role for City Council during disaster events? And what plans are there for us to have the emergency planning training that I, even as a council member 5 years in, have never received, never been offered?
Let me start by saying there is specific requirements for training as we look at required by state law for the chief elected official. In the area of that being the mayor or the county judge. Outside of that, from a regulatory standpoint, there really isn't much. There are some things that we are doing to make sure that we are all sharing the information that we can, and no matter what EOC activation. What I can say is that we're going to look at how we were providing that information to you, or how we can improve in providing that information to you as the council members doing those EOC activations to ensure that you're aware of what's going on and how you can disseminate that information to your districts and ensure that we are addressing those questions. I think that what you heard from us is that realization that the Winter Storm Uri, with everything else that was going on, it stretches really thin, and I think allowed for some of those procedures that we had utilized in the past to communicate to council were stretched very thin, and we need to look at how we can strengthen those. And I'll leave it at that.
Member, can I just add something to the point about the recommendations before we lose that one?
Sure, I think Councilmember Kelly wanted to speak about the council piece, and then you can.
This is real quick. If you'd like to have the same access to the web EOC that I have, I'd be happy to share with you contact information for Capcog so you can get a login. And you can go to preparingtexas.org to do basic training on emergency preparedness. These are things that I do believe should be your role. I don't know if I can just direct you to provide that, but I think it's the consensus of this council that should be provided to incoming council members. It's vitally important that we have that information.
Yes, ma'am.
There were things in there that I needed to tell my constituents about, and I didn't know because I didn't have the information, which is why I went outside of the organization. I just want to make that very clear. Thank you.
And before you take up your point, Councilmember Togo, I think one thing that I've learned in my 5 years is that if there is a vacuum, council will fill it, and you create more work when we don't have the clear paths. When things don't happen, we try to make them happen in other ways, and so it is helpful for you to be able to do your job. I'm very aware that there were situations that council complicated things by asking certain things. Nobody comes out smelling like roses from what happened. Everyone took heroic steps, but we can still learn from that. And my experience as a council member is we need that opportunity to know who we're supposed to be talking to, who's going to answer stuff, who's going to be able to help us with the different pieces. And absent that, we are going to create a maelstrom of, requests that are going to be coming at people who are trying to respond to the emergency. And that can be avoided and improved in so many ways, both to help us to meet the needs of our constituents, but allow other staff to focus on what they need to focus on. Councilmember Tovo, and then if Councilmember Fuentes has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Kelly, I would like access to the WebOC that you mentioned. I have had a day-long disaster training. I can say it wouldn't have helped with what we experienced because of some of the other issues, but I can address that in the context of the after-action report because there are just certain things that I had no surety were going to happen if we didn't step out of our lane as a council office and council staff and do it. So I think that speaks to the communications piece as well. But again, I'll address that with relationship to the after-action report that suggests and sort of implies that part of the issue is council not understanding its role. So to add to the request that our chair made about coming to the after-action conversation, prepared to talk about the prioritization of recommendations, I need to also understand as we have that conversation why that need wasn't advanced to council as a need, and probably I need to hear this from the city manager. I'm really distressed by the audit finding that there was not a process in place for tracking recommendations as well as prioritizing recommendations. I need to understand what was the thinking behind how those recommendations would be implemented if there wasn't a system for tracking them and keeping track of what had been implemented, what a timeline was for implementation. So I know we're running out of time here, and I have zillions of other questions about training and sheltering, which I know we're going to have the subject of another audit, but is important to this one. I have a slew of other questions, but just let me add that one to the request that we get a real clear answer from staff about why, if there were resources needed to do that really important work of tracking and prioritization, why that need wasn't identified and advanced, and what was the thinking behind how those recommendations would be turned into action if there wasn't a tracking mechanism.
If I can speak on that, and to go back to Councilmember Kelly's comments, I think another thing that can be done, and what I would recommend is we offer a EOC representative training that council can participate. We're doing it virtually now. It's about 3 to 4 hours long, and I would urge council to yourself or your staff engage in that training, and I think it will help understand and address some of those questions of what's available. To go back to your,
I think that is the training I referenced that I had participated in, though I believe it was a day long. But thank you for making that available to the whole council.
And then also, I think what we found out, and this is from engagement with the city auditors, is that in previous timeframes, there wasn't a time in between disasters where we were able to address those corrective actions. But because of the amount of disasters that we're having so close to each other, there hasn't been enough time in between them to look at those and complete all of those corrective actions, and that really has caused the congestion in work that needed to be done at the same time as we continue to respond. So we recognize that. But we recognize that because it's happened within the last 2 years. And so we are saying that we need to develop and implement a system of tracking those implementation suggestions and plans that go beyond just one disaster, but to look at multiple disasters. And because it is important that we're looking not just at the corrective actions from one particular disaster, but look at them from how they fit into previous disasters as well. So we recognize that as well, but it came about because of the the amount of, or the number of disasters that we're facing in the last 2 years. That really brought that to light. And we're committed to address it.
Thank you, Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank
I
you.
have to ask you to be reasonably brief to the
Yes.
extent you can. Thank you.
In fact, I will reserve questions until we have our special call meeting. I just wanted to make a brief comment. First, thank you to the Audit and Finance Committee Chair Alter for bringing this forward and for creating the space for us to have this conversation. And thank you to our city auditor, Corey, and your team for working on this. Part of the reason why I'm here today is we know that when disasters happen, not all communities are affected the same. And certainly for communities like mine who are already in a vulnerable position, we often bear the brunt of disasters. And so it was important for me to hear and to get a deeper understanding of what's being presented today. It is troubling to see that we had recommendations that were part of previous after-action reports that were never acted upon. It is really hard to go back to my community and to say, well, we knew what to do, we could have prepared better, but we didn't. But now we know what to do, and we're going to have action on it and implement these recommendations 2 years from now. That's not okay. I cannot do that. I cannot say in 2023 we'll be implementing recommendations so that we never experience what we experienced during the winter storm. And so I just want to underscore the point of how important and urgent it is for us to move forward on these recommendations, to actually implement these recommendations. And as we look at rebuilding a system that is equitable, know that even the map that showed the registrations of Austinites who are on the Warren Central Texas system, you will see that there are significant disparities there. And Austinites who live east of 35 are less likely to be registered on the Warren Central Texas system. And so I expect and I hope that we can have a conversation about what we can do to encourage more of our community to sign up on that alert system, because I know just how crucial it is during times of disaster. And so that's for the brief remarks I wanted to provide.
Thank you. And I just want to point out that even on the west side, the registration is not very high for Warren Central. So we as a community have a lot of work to do. And the media who are here, I would encourage you to please regularly and often help us to encourage folks to be prepared. You have a role in helping us constructively get our community prepared, take the preparedness messages, get folks that information on Warren Central so that we can make sure that our community can do their part of being prepared. So we will have some continued conversations. Ms. Stokes, is it sounds like we may want to have additional conversation in the committee, so I'm a little bit hesitant to approve the audit, but I wanted to just check if there were any complications with that for you, because I don't think it's about so much the questions about the audit and changing the audit as much as it is that we want to keep having communication. So as the auditor, I wanted to just ask you what your preference would be about how we approach that.
Sure. So I am fine either way. The audit is out, as y'all know. It's been posted as a draft. We'll finalize it and post it on our website. If y'all want to approve it today, you can, and we can come back and answer questions later if you want to hold off on that. I think it's accept. If y'all want to accept it today, you can. If you want to do that at a later date, that's fine as well.
What would you like to do?
No, I think given that I don't have a working microphone. Sorry. Thanks very much. I would move that we accept the audit, since we don't have concerns about the audit process, we just have further questions about the audit, and that we do so with a commitment to talking about it at our next Audit and Finance meeting, in addition to trying to find time within that after-action report day to talk about it as well. So I move that we accept the audit.
Okay, so Councilmember Tovo, I'm going to accept that walking motion, and Councilmember Tovo moves to accept the audit, and Councilmember Kelly seconds it. All those in favor? So Councilmember Alter, who are on the dais, accept the audit. Mr. Ortiz, did you want to say something else? Okay. No. So we will try to continue the conversation. I'm sorry that we don't have more time. We did have a budget rider that I authored during the budget process with respect to EMS and sort of how we move forward with some of that EMS is part of our emergency preparedness. So I do want to make sure that we're hearing some of that in a timely manner in case we do need to provide any guidance with respect to that process. Thank you to staff who participated in putting the audit together. Thank you to the staff who lead our emergency team. These are not easy conversations, but they're conversations that we need to have in order to be better prepared, in order for us to make sure that we don't have a repeat and that you have the resources you need to do your job. And we can't understand where those gaps are without having these more in-depth conversations. So we appreciate that opportunity. I think our community is asking for and demanding that we have these conversations. And it helps to also help people be prepared that we can continue to keep with those messages. So thank you all for being here and participating in what I hope will be constructive conversations. So thank you. I'm going to invite up Chief Brown, and I don't know for sure that we won't get to the economic recovery, so since you waited this long, if you can wait till 11:30, because I don't think it's going to take that long, but I just ask that you stay on till 11:30, and we'll see what happens on that, because I don't think there were many issues with that. Chief Brown.